So by way of an introduction, a brief introduction to present this topic, maritime globalization started with the great discoveries at the start of the 18th century, or rather 16th century. And it's at the end of the 19th century that maritime transport will transform its nature with the second wave of industrialization. And after the Second World War, maritime transport will take on this modern dynamic, which we are familiar with, and which means that today the super tankers, super container ships, super cruisers are crisscrossing the seas. And it is that form of transport which led to globalization, which is a topic we've mentioned a lot, with the loss of sovereignty of our nations, which was often linked to the prosperity of maritime transport, which meant we've always been able to transport cheaper and cheaper. What I found interesting in this is I took part in a conference organized by the Toulon Port Authority, and I know there's some representatives of this authority here. It took place last week, and we saw someone arriving in a dressing gown, which we found very surprising, and he was going to take his breakfast. And what was very amusing in this situation is that he was explaining to us that his breakfast came from 30 different countries. So breakfast in the morning, your orange juice, wheat, and so on, will come from 30 different countries of origin, without necessarily there being impacts on us, but impacts in those other nations. And that's thanks to maritime transport. Maritime transport hasn't caused any problems for 80 years. It was done safely, and we were used to peaceful times. And we had forgotten up until the 19th century, merchant ships were attacked across all the seas of the globe. And there was a period of peace at sea that we had never known before. And the question now is whether we're coming back to conflicts at sea with piracy, with criminality. Is this a situation going to last, or is it a temporary episode? We are not sure. So today, there's a new context. The Houthis are attacking us in the Red Sea, that we have ships which are sunk in the Red Sea, that the American Navy, but also the European naval forces in the Aspides operation defend the ships. But we know also that the Ukrainians, with a few drones, have been able to stop the Russians from having any commercial activity in the Black Sea, and that the China Sea is becoming more and more complex for merchant vessels. And in July 2025, 2 Houthi attacks targeted some ships, which were then abandoned at sea after drone attacks. And the Eternity Sea was sunk by explosive devices. And the Houthis spread these images very widely. So is this going to lead to a decrease in maritime traffic, or will merchant vessels be able to benefit from new protective measures? Will it be possible to escape them? Can we have new means of protecting them? That is the question, and we will try to find a solution. First question that I will put to Laurent Bechler. The first question is, what is the significance of commercial maritime traffic in a more and more conflictual world? To what extent is this traffic already affected by conflicts between states, but also by criminality at sea? Thierry. So it would be great if we could see the map. I could describe it to you, but that would take a bit of time. Eric, you said a lot of things by way of introduction, and in particular the fact that the transport maritime just represents globalization of commerce, because we have Archimedes push on one side and the fluidity of water on the other side means that it it is energetically unbeatable to transport goods via sea. So, of course, we have been using rivers and oceans and seas to do mass transports ever since the beginnings of time. The prosperity of maritime transport is also thanks to the fact that in 1971 the dollar became a universal currency, exchange currency, that gave rise to stability. And second point is specialization of industrial production capacity. Some do production, some do transformation, some do industry, etc. And then we've got and this led to a huge need for maritime transport. You took the example of breakfast, and I take the example of the lithium-ion battery that you have in your mobile phones, for example. It comes from South America, cobalt for Africa. It's been 2 or 3 times through Asia to be integrated and comes back to Europe to be sold. So the lithium-ion battery has been at least once around the world before arriving in your home, and it'll go around the world once again when it is recycled. So our daily objects all depend on maritime transport. It's not always very well known. All our objects today depend on maritime transport. 90% of commercial flows take place via maritime transport. And as you've said, these maritime flows are a little more threatened than previously. So we've had a cycle of peace. Now, however, there is the appearance of new threats. And as we don't have the map, could we have the map full screen, says the host? You will see on the map the main maritime transport routes which link 3 main blocks: Southeast Asia, the East Coast of America, the European coastline, with 2 small passages with the Arabian Gulf on the one side and the Red Sea. Then there are other routes less frequented, but the Cape of Good Hope in Africa and the Panama Canal to link to the east coast of America with Southeast Asia. Across these main routes, when we look at the areas of threat for merchant vessels, we see the 3 types. Those that have always existed is those which are generated by the value of the cargo. Cargo is valuable, so therefore it gives rise to piracy. It's always existed, and we find it in passages close to coastlines. The straits in Southeast Asia, particularly affected, along the east coast of Africa, and at the entry point to the Red Sea in the Gulf of Guinea, because quite a lot of hydrocarbon transport along the west coast of Africa and a little bit in the Caribbean. Piracy has existed since the beginning of times, but from an economic point of view, I think we've modelized it with statistics, and it is dealt with by insurance. The other threat has also existed for a long time is commercial wars, whether it's a state or a criminal group or a proxy or whatever you might want, will attack these commercial lines in order to pressure a country. This is what's going on in the Red Sea, and that's what we also see in the Black Sea, when the Russians tried to block the Ukrainian-Russian transport of grains. It wasn't necessarily a particularly good idea. In fact, that stopped even before Ukraine managed to more or less defeat the Russian fleet in the Black Sea. Okay, could we have a full screen view of the cart, says the host? Because So the first is just a geographical description. The third type of threat is that which we endure. So they don't necessarily directly target maritime traffic, but they go through tense areas, which means that traffic is affected. So, for example, in the China Sea, in the Eastern Mediterranean today, and it's not happening yet, But we could imagine that in the Baltic Sea, we could put pressure on the Russian flows of maritime traffic. So there are maritime regions where there is pressure on these flows more than before, because piracy is something we've already had. The commercial wars has happened in episodes. We've quoted the 19th century, but also big episodes of the Atlantic campaigns of the Germans in the First and Second World Wars to interrupt the flow of military equipment across the Atlantic. Eric de Nefle, perhaps you could explain to us in what the risk of war for ships has changed in the last decade or so, and what is your vision as a war risk insurer of this new threat at sea? I'm talking about interstate conflicts, but also the instrumentalization of terrorist groups or of proxies. How do the shipping companies manage to adapt to this threat? And maybe thanks to you. So first of all, thank you for this invitation. Please forgive me for my rough voice. I have a throat infection at the moment. But thanks to the microphone, you'll probably be able to hear me anyway. The good news is that I won't be able to talk for very long, so I won't be able to bore you stiff. The risk of war has changed over the last 15 or 10 years. I started working 40 years ago. 40 years ago, there was no risk of war as such. The first war claim loss was the attack of the Hindenburg. That was in Yemen, and it had been quickly followed by the attack of the SS Cole, attacks by the Yemenite forces who attacked this ship, which was the symbol of the American fleet in this region. Then we had the period of piracy near Somalia, which went from the years 2000 to 2013. So we had 13 successive years of pirate attacks off the Somalian coast. It also extended across all of the Indian Ocean to go almost just to the Nicobar and Andaman Islands, right the other side, to arrive in the Indian zones of influence. So pirates who clearly had a who were highly self-confident and had a process to extend and to become more and more efficient. We had other situations which were like, which were forms of use of violence at sea, no longer piracy, no longer pure military domain, were in the realm of decisions of states who create embargo situations. There, remember having lived through the situation created by the American decision in 2018 to start an embargo on Venezuelan oil. So how does an embargo against Venezuelan oil have an impact on maritime traffic? Well, from one day to the next, that's how it happened. The American administration decided that Venezuelan oil could no longer go to the United States, and that it was hit by a generalized embargo to the extent that Venezuela was not doing what the Americans wanted. We ended up with 30 or 40 tankers ready to leave Venezuela, and who were becoming ships which had no destination because no one could buy this oil that was already on board these tankers, different nationalities, Turkish, Greek, and Russian tankers. And so we ended up for about 18 months with the 30 or so oil tankers which couldn't move. More recently, of course, we have all lived through this, and you see it every day. The Houthi attacks on all the ships which want to pass through the Red Sea. The Houthis started to attack ships not in October 2023, but in 2014, at the time of the start of the civil war between the Houthis and the central government, Yemenite central government. And these Houthi attacks were directed towards the Saudi Arabian oil tankers. Why? Well, because the Saudi Arabian oil tankers, or the tankers loaded with oil from Saudi Arabia, were a target, given that Saudi Arabia supported the central government of Yemen. So we saw the development, without anyone talking about it in the media, because it wasn't a public topic, a certain number of attacks regularly organized by the Houthis. At the time, they used magnetic mines, limpet mines. They also used boats with explosives on board, and they attacked a dozen or so tankers from Saudi Arabia, all transporting Saudi Arabian oil. So between 2014 to 2023, it was very difficult to monitor the situation, to understand what was going on, because even the interests of Saudi Arabia did not communicate about these attacks. They didn't want it to be recognized that Saudi Arabia was not able to protect either its tankers or the cargo from the Houthi attacks. The Houthis are very well organized, they are very well armed, and they have people who are very structured to get hold of technology which can be used today to destructive ends at sea. And to answer your question, because what are we expecting tomorrow is a lot more technology that will be used to destroy at sea anything that can be destroyed according to the interests of the belligerents. A population which is using them, which is trained in these technologies, so at engineering level, and logistics circuits which allow them to be able to use these technological attacks. And therefore, I think if you want to be able to understand the context, we need to remember that during the piracy off the Somalian coast, we found a way of basically preventing these attacks. They embarked armed men to counter the attacks from the Somali fishermen, because the fishermen were basically being pirates. And today, a ship which is transiting via the Red Sea, and for us to give the lowest possible insurance rate, they said, well, look, you know, we'll be putting armed men aboard, but we believe that this is probably not the right response. Faced with drones and missiles is more technological means of defense rather than armed men. And I'm sure there are lots of people in this room who know a lot a lot more about what technology we're talking about. We also perhaps need jammers to protect ourselves from these attacks, and to have onboard ships not armed guards, but engineers who can use these jammers at the right time with effectiveness. So finally, we're talking about a modern armed conflict. It's an evolution of the role of armed guards. It's no longer a question of firing on a boat that's arriving. We have new attack technologies which require new countermeasures. So now I think we could perhaps listen to Captain Aurélie Léouvre. So please tell us about the Red Sea. And what do we need to do about ensuring the protection of ships against missiles and drones? Is it something that you had envisaged 5 years ago? Was it foreseeable? And tell us how these operations went and what your thoughts are about them. So thank you. First of all, I wanted to talk to you about our commitment, the commitment of warships for protection of maritime traffic. And then I will detail the Red Sea part of the question. Since the 19th of February 2024, we are committed to the Aspides operation, which is a word which means shield in Greek. It's a protection operation of maritime traffic in the Red Sea and in the Gulf of Aden. This operation was launched as a matter of emergency, even if there had been prior attacks. But it was as a matter of emergency because the security situation had become so bad that we had reached a high level of violence against vessels which were being attacked, not just once, but attacks lasting several hours with different kinds of threats, which I will go into detail of later. So there is a need for reassurance, reassuring our maritime traffic from the entry into the Red Sea right up to the Strait of Hormuz, with the implementation of the possibility of use of force, with directives for use of force for protecting maritime traffic. The aim was to guarantee maritime safety in the context within the framework of maritime law, with 3 modes of action: monitoring of the maritime situation, to have an overarching view of the maritime situation, the escorting of vessels who had requested it from the Aspides organization, and then the protection of ships which were enduring combined and repeated attacks. Our role in this operation in Red Sea was part of a continuous and resolute action led by France in the Indian Ocean and in the Red Sea, because historically we had already been present through a European commitment in the context of the Atalante operation, which was a successful example of an operational mission to fight piracy in this area. And with the combined maritime force, fighting drug trafficking in that area. There is also the permanent action of the MICA Center, which is in place in Brest since June 2016, and which dialogues and exchanges information with maritime traffic, and which engages in cooperation against all kinds of threats. That's something new. The Navy today has an international center based in Brest, which will ensure the monitoring of all maritime areas and is in direct communication with all ships everywhere across the world to advise them about their routes and the threats, and which also collects a lot of information. And that is a really great innovation. It dates back to 2016, this information center. So that is something we need to emphasize. Absolutely. And it gives both the ships and the shipping companies particularly detailed briefs according to their requests, and safety information, or even issues warnings when we know that there could be a threat from land towards sea. And your mission out in the field, what happened? Well, out in theater, I wasn't the first ship deployed to the area, so I was able to benefit from the feedback of warships that had been there before me. We were faced with intense threats, which went from drones, small shared-type drones, to Ahodo's munitions, or one-way attack drones towards commercial ships, with ballistic missiles, using cruise missiles, surface drones. I think we have seen pretty much everything, not necessarily all at the same time, but we've seen all of them go by. We have seen a change in the threats with one element in common: these ballistic missiles. These merchant vessels that you were escorting were threatened, or also the frigates. So these attacks were mostly targeting the merchant ships, but that wasn't the case for the American warships, which were targeted directly. There's no secret about that. For us, it was mostly the merchant vessels which we were escorting, or not, because we were escorting groups of 3 warships at a time. We worked in convoys, but some of the vessels transited alone, and those vessels were sometimes attacked, and therefore we would intervene often as a second line to go and protect them and escort them back to a safe area. And so what are your thoughts about this operation? Do you feel that you were well equipped for this? It seems that the Navy seems to have done well. What do we need to foresee for the future? Yes, we were well equipped, but the feedback was in short loop. So the ships that were in the area would feedback about the threats that they were encountering, and therefore the ship that arrived next would adapt accordingly. We even had system updates by our OEMs to allow us to be even more, to gain even more performance. And so this was done much faster than usual. And we were also able to adjust our training. Last week, we carried out an exercise you probably heard about called WILFA, where we really train in the real-life conditions that we will encounter in the Red Sea using simulation, but also with targets and drones in order to really recreate the situation.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Aurélien. We'll move on to Sebastian Takis, the representative of the Prime Minister. Do you know what's happening at the moment, Sebastian? A little bit confused, perhaps? No? Sebastian Taki from the SG Maire, the General Secretariat for the Sea. You're going to explain how Europe and France have taken this threat into account on shipping, and you're going to tell us about the strategy that is being envisaged, how France deals with this threat on the political level today. Yes, thank you for inviting me to this roundtable. It's a huge subject, the strategy, when we're talking about European and national strategy. I've written about 100 pages to communicate on this subject. I'll try and make that a little bit shorter in my presentation. On this subject, we're talking about an area of competency of the member states. So these are national areas of competence, and the European Union provides an additional layer to allow cooperation between the means of the different countries to enable cooperation, and also through training actions and support actions to create regional centres. We've talked about maritime information, for example. This provides support for the action of the national navies when they are at sea. The European Union, I'll start with the European Union. It had a strategy which was reviewed in 2023. It's only been updated quite recently. It has 6 major objectives. I'll give into detail on those. The first one is to intensify activities at sea, to set a framework for certain operations. And in the EU operations, you have the maritime part is preponderant in military activities the EU can carry out through Atalanta in the Indian Ocean, which is combating piracy, as we've heard from Aurélie. And then today, since the end of 2024, it's now opened up to all of the illegal activities at sea, because this corresponds to criminal activity, terrorism, and other high-intensity activities that can occur. There's a continuum in all of these threats. This Atalanta part was added to. Secondly, we have action of the EU in the Mediterranean, which covers the embargo on weapons destined for Libya. These annual exercises are carried out to ensure maritime safety and security. One was held last year in the Mediterranean off the coast of Italy and Spain. This is the Mars exercise on critical infrastructure and on illegal fishing and non-regulated fishing. This European framework enables us to find partners, as the Chief of Staff of the Navy mentioned yesterday. And of course, we also work on questions of defense with NATO which is the preferential framework for this, rather than the EU. The national navies, for example, in France, they have this dual role that has been mentioned. In other words, we don't have a problem changing from a military threat to a threat to be dealt with by the police. What happens with the other national navies? Are they also going through this cultural evolution, or is it complicated? This is a nice transition to the national strategy. Our national strategy has specific characteristics. There's this interministerial approach, first of all, from the top at the national level, around the Prime Minister and the General Secretariat of the Sea, who lead this in collaboration with the other ministries. We are different from other European states in this, and we make use of the maritime prefects, especially in the domestic territory. We don't have any problem in using the legal channel when we're carrying out activity. The National Navy intervenes in terms of the sovereign intervention at sea. At any time, a vessel has the legal capability and is able to change from a civilian action to a military action. That's a big asset. That's a big asset that France has. We're able to change from one to the other. We were a forerunner in terms of dealing with the level of threat between the military and civilian threat. We're now going to move on the theme of new threats. If the technical office could show us map number 2. We'll start with Admiral Bechler. From the point of view of the CSM Navy's Outlook Center, how are you going to look at the activities of other states? This is the map that identifies the areas where the maritime space is being jeopardized, and also the areas where criminal activity is taking place. We know China and Turkey and the Persian Gulf are areas where the situation is changing, and also the Black Sea, and also criminal activity as well. So, Admiral, how do you see the changes in these threats? How are they evolving? I'm not going to talk specifically about this map. I'm also going to talk about the threats that are not only military or security threats, but threats concerning shipping. From the security point of view, we've already covered this, I think, when we answered the first question, talking about areas of piracy or geopolitical tension. We have areas where our interests are being threatened, for example, New Caledonia, where certain countries are making geopolitical use of France's so-called weaknesses in this area, and the African interests, which are being expressed around Mayotte and the islands in the Mozambique channel. One of the subjects we need to talk about, when talking about the maritime area, is the territorialization of the sea. Some countries want to take charge of the open seas and bring it under their area of competency instead of it being treated as the high seas. In the high seas, we have an international exclusion zone, but in terms of navigation, this has no impact at all. The territorial seas are covered by the national jurisdiction. You've all heard about China and the Xitong line in the Chinese Sea of China, which claims quite high authority over a large part of the China Sea with a system of polarization where it colonizes islands and puts their infrastructure and people on these islands. And then it uses the convention to says it has authority over 12 nautical miles around these areas. The China doesn't call into question the Montego Bay Convention. It uses it to make claims on areas of the ocean. Around Cyprus also, I don't know if you remember, in 2018, the Turkish Navy intercepted an Italian drilling ship that was prospecting an area of sea, and they said that the relevant zone was claimed by the Cypriot Republic, supported by Turkey, and that Turkey already had the jurisdiction over this area, and so the Italian was there illegally. This desire to territorialize and claim the areas of the sea as a part of national territory means that sometimes routes have to be deviated and diverted, rather. Other threats exist on shipping. is climate change. Also, this happens in two ways. The first way is that Panama Canal one day may have to close because today, with the reduction of rainfall, this is a threat to the canal because it requires rainfall in order to be able to be navigable. And of course, a huge number of vessels go through this canal. Although we can go around Africa because the Cape of Good Hope is a traditional route, if we go around the Cape Horn, that is much more risky because of the weather conditions. So this is very much linked to climate change. This opens up other opportunities. If you look at a map of the globe entirely, the routes to Japan and China can use the Arctic Sea, and the routes around the northwest and the northeast can represent opportunities for this. So that's why today it's an area of tremendous geopolitical tension. In 30 or 40 years' time, it's possible a lot of world shipping may go through that area in the northeast and northwest around the Arctic area. And the last threat I'll mention is proportional to shipping that is increasing is the increase in piracy. This is directly proportional to the increase in shipping. The vessels carry declared goods, also carry a lot of illegal or non-declared goods. And all of this shipping, whether it's a piracy that is unloading or loading illegal goods, means that shipping will increase in the future. Yesterday we heard that we have more than 60 tons of cocaine have been seized. This is because the amount of shipping is increasing, and the number of captures is not increasing. It's the quantity of drugs that are captured that is greater every time. I don't know whether you do a lot of prediction or forecasting. Maybe you're well placed to measure these changes. I think there are new technologies. We're all thinking of pirates who arrive with their skiff with a Yamaha engine and their sat-nav. There are also cyber threats, drones, blackmail. How do you see all of this, Frédéric? Concerning the first part of your question, and to respond to what we've just heard, insurance companies find it difficult to forecast what is going to happen with the increasing conflicts around the world and everything concerning the explanation of the origin of a conflict, whatever it might be. All of this is very difficult to control and understand. You have to have specialists who talk to each other and understand what is happening. So you're more of a statistician. We try to identify the economic signals of what we are paying for, and we try to understand why something is happening at a particular pace to respond to what was just said. We are seeing today something which is has been slightly dormant previously, which is the territorial claims over the open seas by various states. They want to control areas which are contiguous to their sovereign seas, whether it's sea areas or land areas. We've seen several examples of, of course, the Russians with Ukraine, and also the US administration with Greenland. We have the Russians in the north, offshore from Norway, with the Svalbard Islands, and obviously in Asia, everything that China is doing with regard to Taiwan to try to get people to accept that Taiwan is part of China. And the state of Taiwan is not a state of Taiwan. It's part of the inland, part of China's territorial seas. So we have to be very observant and very attentive to what is happening. All of this is accelerating. We're not used to this desire of countries to project their power into the seas around them in this way. When a country decides to do this, it destabilizes navigation in the area and in the surrounding area around it. When I say destabilize, I mean it's controlling the shipping in that area. We've seen examples of this using conventional means. You talked about China earlier. We've seen that the Chinese fishing vessels, with thousands of vessels, can destabilize an agreed shipping route and can block entries and exits from certain areas where there's a lot of traffic, because a lot of vessels are going through the Taiwan Strait. We have other more sophisticated means, such as spoofing and jamming. which again are means of destabilization using technology. So technology plays an important role when you're talking about disorganization and increasing conflict around the world. And then you have everything to do with cyber risk. Cyber risk can destabilize an economic activity and can dissuade economic players from becoming involved. For example, there was an attack on the Maersk's vessel in 2017, 2018, where in fact, because of a cyber attack on the IT links between the Maersk operational center and its vessels, Maersk no longer knew where its container ships were. So that was, they lost $300 million as a result. This was in their international report. It's extremely considerable, very significant. So the reaction after that is to say, have we said something? Have we done something? Have we taken a commercial position relating to a country which could have caused a problem for a country, which could have resulted in them taking this kind of action? So cyber attacks are also a way of destabilizing shipping and of course private economic interest as well. Then we have the threats on the undersea cables, which should not be ignored either. We all depend on internet. Internet goes on through these undersea cables. We insure these cables against the risk of war. Yes, this is a risk we are discovering more and more. I've tried to look at this recently and tried to understand the technological version of an undersea cable to see what you can do. I don't have a complete mastery of this area. I'm not a specialist, but we've discovered that undersea cable can be seen as a sensor of information and sound. So somebody who wants to conceal the presence of a submarine will start by destroying the undersea cables in that area, so that that cannot be located when they go through that area. And then on a more broader sense, if you want to destabilize an economy today in 2 or 3 places, you can destroy undersea cables. Undersea cables are repaired quite easily, but you have to mobilize means of repair, which are not necessarily on site. It takes time. These are the cable laying vessels, yes, with specialized teams. And this, again, can create destabilization. Let's remain on shipping, although undersea cables are important, of course, also. Can you tell us a secret, which you are not sharing with anybody else apart from everybody in the room here? Are there any risks you no longer insure today? Yes. We don't want to insure the cyber risk anymore. We don't have enough bonuses to be able to deal with the potential cyber risk on shipping. This is something that the maritime insurance companies no longer cover. In certain cases, during a crisis, do you insure vessels? Yes, when the Galaxy was attacked in 2023, we were asked to insure these vessels, and we said the Galaxy leader has just been taken over by Yemenite terrorists, and the Galaxy leader, it was a car carrier. It was carrying cars from Turkey to the Middle East. The charter was organized. It left the port empty. It was worth $80 million. And in the relevant areas, we had $150,000 of premium per year. How do you balance that out? I don't think it's possible. I don't think any insurance company knows how to do that. So as we're not able to have a balance between the two, what is a consequence of that? That means you have shipping offshore from the Reunion Island and off the coast of Brittany. That means that the shipping routes are changing. Okay, thank you. We need to accelerate a little bit because I want us to finish on time in this first part of 1 hour. Nevertheless, for you, on the operational side, what are the threats caused by dissemination of military technology or linked to dual or cyber technologies that concern you the most in the future? These threats exist in every environment and every field. This is why now we are planning. We're talking about M1 multi-field and multi-environment. We have to take account of a lot of different factors. And I'll repeat what has already been said, but of course, the drones are something we're looking at very closely, a threat that is changing very quickly. We are looking very much at what is happening in the Ukraine conflict, and also with the Aspides project. The drone threat there has changed considerably as well. We are adapting continuously, and we're always looking for any technological changes which will make these threats even more difficult to detect and to dispose of. The cyber area has already been discussed. We also have systems which are increasingly automated. So we tackle this with great care, because we know that in the event of a cyber attack, everything can be brought down. So these are certainly aspects we're looking at very closely. What we can note is that this is something that other people have said as well. Yes, we have the high-intensity activities. Here we're looking at everything such as hypersonic missiles, etc. Is the Navy going to acquire new means to ensure protection of merchant vessels against this proliferation of drones and new missiles and others? This is already the case. We are already adapting to this with jamming systems. We are constantly improving our systems as well. What I would like to say is that I think 15 years ago, we would not have imagined that a political religious group such as the Houthis would have been able to fire ballistic missiles. That has to be taken into account as well. This is within reach of anybody now. And at the same time, we have ballistic missiles. We also still have drones and skiffs with dummy crews attacking us as well. So we have to be imaginative and enterprising and ingenious. Thank you very much, Sebastian Takis. How does the state take account of these new threats that we've just mentioned, which have been very well presented? I've been told, somebody told me that a new strategy for maritime safety is being prepared. Can you give us a sneak preview of what this new strategy might contain? Well, you have some very reliable sources of information. Yes, it's true. Our strategy was first defined in 2019, and it's now time to review it. The review began several months ago, and this means we have several strategic documents have been added to the review. There is a review that is underway, which will be completed soon. This is run by the interministerial document at the ADSN and the SGMER. So yes, we are taking account of the new risks and new threats. And the latest interministerial committee meeting, well, the main, what is the, how are you improving your capacities in this area, your capabilities? Well, in terms of our capabilities, we are making use of programming laws as defined by the Ministry for the Army. One particular effort that has not been mentioned so far is the land-sea interface and everything concerning port security, because when ships arrive in the port and they arrive and then leave again. And so clearly these are subjects that have already been taken into account in the anti-terrorist action following 2001. But we still have a number of weaknesses, particularly concerning illegal traffics and drug trafficking particularly, which have a direct impact on shipping also because of the activities on containers, which destabilize the whole chain. So this is a particularly important concern, and we are setting up actions in the ports to be able to strengthen the level of security in this area. Okay, very good. We'll now move on to the third part. Can we now see the third map, which is an FMES map? This is work done in 2022, imagining the maritime world in 2040. This is an interesting map because the dark orange areas are seen by us as areas that are lost. I'm exaggerating a little bit, where the situation will be difficult. In other words, to get through those areas, you'll have to have a lot of resources. And then the yellow areas will possibly be territorial seas, where it should be possible to navigate. What we can also see here are the lifelines that are not disputed. We believe that these big maritime routes on the open seas will be used more and more by commercial vessels who will move away from what we call the brown waters to find more security in the blue waters. And we believe Reunion Island and New Caledonia are very much two key areas. So if there's an area where France should strengthen its position and guarantee deterrence, it is certainly New Caledonia and Reunion Island, which increasingly are in areas which are absolutely strategic. When you look at some of the events in these territories, this could be explained by the ambitions of other powers, because these two areas are increasingly on high sea routes, the blue waters. Admiral Becher, what do you think of this outlook from the FMES? I don't necessarily agree with all of the colors on this map. I think it's a bit too pessimistic, perhaps. We're talking about 2040. Well, even in 2040, I think it's a bit of an exaggeration to see the Red Sea as lost. The Sea of China also. It's very much territorialized, yes, in this map. Because the weapon systems mean that it will be more and more difficult to navigate in these areas. The speaker's not using a microphone. I'm sorry, I can't interpret. I'm afraid we cannot interpret because the speaker is not using a microphone. If somebody could give them a microphone, that would be nice, then I could interpret.
Les analyses se recoupent, ouais. Et surtout, ça met un...
Yes, the analyses are concordant. Yes, if we're talking about overseas territories, the mariners have no doubts about that at all. In any case, what we call the undisputed lifeline, which is a maritime route, goes around Tasmania and the Cape of Good Hope, is already used for particularly sensitive transport. It's a safe route, which shows that our two territories of Reunion Island and New Caledonia are important because of their position on this route, which goes south of Africa. It makes it possible to divert international trade if the Red Sea was blocked. So in terms of providing support, this would be easier because we have relatively good control of the Indian Ocean. And if you studied the situation during the World War II in the Pacific Ocean, you'll know that the US used New Caledonia as a strategic supply point. So New Caledonia is very important in order to be able to control this eastern part of the Pacific Ocean. This map assumes that the production sites will remain the same, and we're only looking at shipping routes. Today, there is a movement we've looked at with the Banque de France, which is Frenchoring, which is to say that part of production could be relocated closer to the reception areas. This would mean that the shipping routes would be shorter and therefore with more traffic. And this might slightly change the vision that you have shown here, where you have the specialization of the different types of production remains the same. French shoring So that means there would be less traffic, less shipping? Is that what it means? So therefore, you have a reintegration of certain areas of production would be taken over by countries. This is what we've been talking about in ARESMED, with the reindustrialization of certain countries. The basic idea is that the routes would be shorter, and this would limit the need for tonnage of transported goods. This would mean a rebalancing between land and sea when they have shorter distances. You have other solutions such as trains, etc., which are on land rather than at sea.
We can see that the shipping companies count a lot on the safety brought by the Navy, especially the French Navy, but do the shipping companies think about ensuring a minimum of their own protection? We know that the Anglo-Saxon world has advanced a lot in terms of their ship protection teams, but we've not even asked this question in France. We're afraid of militarization, but are we not missing the boat in this regards? And when we talk about militarization today, I know that the cable layer ships are very worried because the Navy cannot protect them everywhere, because we are recentering ourselves on the European scene, and that today we don't have high-level teams with cyber capacities. Is this something which you think is of interest as an insurer? In the world of tomorrow, will you be ready to insure ships which have self-protection means rather than those which have nothing at all? So minimal protection, yes, of course, that's much better for the insurer, but not anyone. And so that's the whole question. Who can ensure the safety and security of private maritime transport? In France, there have been partnership with the French Navy and French Army special forces embarked on ships destined to the shores of Somalia. And if we've been able to deploy armed guards aboard the ships off the shores of Somalia, it's because the Somalian state was not opposed to this. We tried to have the same approach off the coast of Guinea to avoid repeated piracy. We've got French interests over there. I won't go into details, but over there, it's not the insurers or anyone else. It's the local authorities who are resistant to this because they don't want to see armed men on merchant fleets, because it questions the innocent passage through territorial waters, except if the weapons are kept in a closed locker. Yes, of course, there are conditions, but by way of principle, there are a certain number of states, especially in sensitive areas. It's very difficult to obtain the agreement of local authorities, which are very shady about this. And from the Guinean state, we have not been able to reach an agreement to be able to implement such a measure to limit the risk of piracy in that area, when this has been going on for 30 years in the Gulf of Guinea. So it's something that we're very familiar with. Occasionally, it disappears. At the moment, it's tending to reappear very fast, and we haven't yet found the right solution. In terms of protecting yourself against drones and hyper technology, that is a completely different dimension. That's additional layers of security. You cannot put state level protections on all these merchant vessels. First of all, when we are able to embark prevention and protection teams aboard merchant vessels, that's the first law that we'd have to implement. Then you'd have to find the right teams and the specialists which are ready to do this work on threatened vessels. It's very difficult to find crews which are ready to go to the Red Sea. The Filipinos, for example, no longer want to go to the Red Sea. The Thai government has implemented laws in order to forbid the entry of its sailors into the Red Sea, because when a ship is stopped by the Houthis, the crew is kidnapped, and then the states have to try to to work hard to try to recover their kidnapped sailors. And so there is this issue of the safety of the embarked personnel, be it commercial crews or technical crews, for example, technical crews which have been embarked to work their jammers on board. We need to find laws to as a framework for that. Sébastien, what are your thoughts about this alternative, which would avoid us having to have the state take the responsibility for the protection of these ships? Is there any work going on today to keep the state focused on the most dangerous and conflict-ridden areas with high-level capabilities? So 2 thoughts about this. So then we'll move on to the Slido questions. So there's a very political issue when we go back to 2014, 2016, which allowed us to authorize private protection teams on national commercial vessels. Within the debate, there was the issue of mercenaries, and that armed vessels remained needed to remain be operated by the state. So the peak of piracy was in 2010 and not in 2014. These are very divisive topics on a political level, and which spill over into the question of what is responsibility of the state, what's the state of the public, and what is the state of private. So, what are the competencies of each domain? And this is my second thought, and something I mentioned at the start, which is the right response for piracy is no longer the right response today, and the escalation between the shield and the swords is not balanced now. So let's imagine a different legal framework. I think it's a bit early to do that. And we still need a state response via military means. So what I take away from this is that we're not going towards a world which is going towards more peace, as Amiral Bechler has said, but also the conflicts between states and crime will increase, and will make use of technology. We've seen that some solutions will be routes which will go much more further out at sea. On the high seas, for example, going near Reunion Island, perhaps the navies will manage to make all the areas safe. That is a wish. Will it happen or not is the question. The first level protection is perhaps something that we need to think more about. And what I also take away from this is that the cyber threat is a threat which is complex, and where we will need to work as a domain in its own right. Now we will move over to the questions. We need short answers to be able to answer as many as possible. The most voted for question is, how can we improve cooperation between the member states of the EU when the models of the navies are radically different? This is an important topic. We could ask Admiral Bechler perhaps to give his opinion, and then maybe Sébastien Tarkis. Are the navies with whom we cooperate a lot more because they are similar to us, and are the changes that we can foresee in this area at a European level? So are there navies with which we cooperate because they are similar to us? Yes, we cooperate an awful lot with the Royal Navy from the UK, just across the Channel, of course. We also cooperate well with the Italian and Greek navies, and we are trying to increase our cooperation with the navies from Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands. When you say that the models of the navies are radically different, it's more how each state organizes security at sea. Security on the high seas normally is the responsibility of the Navy, and there are very few European navies which are able to sustain long periods of time on the high seas. And then the other issue is the interoperability of our navies. Do we have those common standards and CONOPS? And of course, NATO is made for that. However, we are able to cooperate. The question is more, what is the will of the states to cooperate? And when we are close to the shores, we have different state models, which mean that it's a little more tricky. Sébastien Tarqui? With regard to illegal activities, it's what we look at the most at the Secretariat General of the Sea. And when we looked at the activities of the various European navies, France is in first place in terms of drug trafficking control on the high seas. We seize 8 or 9 tons each time rather than a couple of grams on land. And so our aim is to encourage European navies to act on the high seas, and we want them to do that a lot more than what they do today. Another question about NATO, perhaps Aurélie Léouvre. What is your vision of a brilliant officer? What is the role of the Navy in the securitization of maritime traffic in NATO? So for me, NATO doesn't have a role for this. However, in the establishment of a generalized tactical situation and the monitoring of situations and the analysis of situations and of interactions between different states, which then have an influence on maritime traffic, but it is not part of NATO's responsibilities directly. Even if NATO has recently created a marine infrastructures protection cell, if there is a critical importance of an infrastructure, perhaps NATO there has a role to play. So perhaps we should remind you that NATO doesn't have a role in its own right. It has a role which is conceded to it by the states which compose it. If we need to use the Navy to ensure the safety of maritime commerce, we need to deploy those means. NATO is mostly focused, and it's what you're saying, about maritime infrastructures. If tomorrow the commercial flows between the United States and Europe were to be threatened, it is highly probable that this NATO, which was made on purpose to protect the North Atlantic, would intervene. As we stand, it is not the case, and so I don't have a specific example to say whether what the role of NATO is for maritime safety. However, the case of the Russian vessel impounded by the French, I was actually in Brest at the time when this ship was impounded. So are we talking with this case about something relevant to our discussion today? Yes, so the problem is that this is a criminal procedure, and the confidentiality of the case means that we can't have any information about it. What we know is that the captain is being cross-examined for his refusal to cooperate. And so this is something quite different to the threats that we've mentioned today, and the vessel has been able to be freed. And so we've not even been able to keep hold of the vessel to be able to do an in-depth appraisal of the vessel to see whether any traces of explosives or any kinds of launching rails or any for missiles. This is a very transparent case, and it is very difficult to draw any lessons from it at this stage of the information that I have. However, President Putin's reaction was very interesting. His reaction in front of the world media, and he says that France has committed an act of piracy, which means that he had this affair in mind. And if he had this in mind, it's not by chance. That means that something was going on with the ship which was of interest to the Russians. I feel that Sébastien Tarquis would like to be able to say something, but he cannot. What are you allowed to say to us about this? What is your opinion or your view? I'm sure you have a bit more information. Of course, this is a subject which is linked to what we've mentioned today with international sanctions imposed on transport from Russia, especially with regard to Russian oil. There are different legal principles at work here, competence of the of where the ship is registered, Montego-Bay competencies, competencies of warships. So it's what Frédéric Deneffler said. It is being taken to court. It is for refusal to cooperate. It is what was communicated by the court in Brest, and the case is ongoing. So I think that is right on topic. So the speaker is not talking with a microphone, so the interpreter cannot hear. So what we can say about this ship is, or this vessel, is that it's this type of vessel can transport drones which can be launched near the shores. So we are in this new dimension. And I think that for many states, it is quite worrying to have drones being launched just near their territorial waters, and which can fall in areas where they have ammonia storage tanks and so on. There is a threat which is complex, and this is the criminalization of the world, so it's very much on topic. It's this type of vessel which will continually change flag, and so we never know what its flag is. And so it might have been intercepted at sea because we didn't know its nationality, and as he refused to comply, France has applied the law and was able to escort it back. And this ghost fleet are these ships who who drag their anchor. I've never seen a ship let its anchor drag like this. They start also to launch drones. They're starting to release mines. So next question: what role for the customs inspectors? SG Maire, so Secretariat General of the Sea, which ensures the coordination of the forces. So customs agents have particular responsibilities between 12 and 24 nautical miles from the shore. So it's coastal waters and slightly beyond with its 3 patrol boats. They are very present in the Caribbean, which is an area where there's a lot of drug trafficking. And they are also the agents of everything that is regarded to illegal trafficking. So the port and airports and sea aspects of the customs agents, and they are very valuable as part of a continuum. It's great to have them up your sleeve. Of course, what is great with the customs agents is that they have competencies to do with customs law, which the maritime domain does not have. And so with the SG Maire, with their power of coordination, can deploy the forces as they choose. This ship of the Ghost Fleet might have been detained in port for technical reasons. It offers you a whole range of means, and the customs agents are part of this, and we're in an era where we're seeing a territorialization of the maritime domain. We think that customs will have a more and more important role to play in this. Now, a technical question about Reunion Island. What is the role of Reunion Island in the protection of maritime transport, given that France has a military base in Djibouti? I think 2 different natures. Laurent Becheler, would you like to answer this question? So 2 different things. The military base in Djibouti, for whoever has been to this naval base, they will realize that it is a tiny naval base and that the key we use for our frigates in Djibouti is tiny, and it's also fairly far away from the area concerned by piracy, but certainly nearer than Réunion Island. Réunion Island is different because it is French territory, so we are at home. And so Réunion Island today is the closest support base for the routes going via the Cape of Good Hope. So very important for maritime flows, and also a very important support base for the French Navy. There are a few boats which stop off at Réunion Island for logistics reasons. We have a couple of workshops to be able to repair warships, and our permanent means to support our Ocean Indian fleet are in the Réunion Islands. But so we have a few support bases in the area, but it is not enough to ensure protection. Sébastien, anything more to say about that? So Réunion Island is very much an area which is increasing in importance, and which is probably doesn't have enough means given what is going on in this region, especially for maritime safety. And I know that the merchant fleets are requesting increased monitoring and protection means. However, the state cannot do everything and needs to make choices. Next question, based around safety questions. When there are mines floating on the Red Sea, what do you do, Aurélie? Luckily, for the moment, we haven't yet come across any. If there are some, well, the first thing is to be able to spot them. It could completely block maritime traffic, and it is the poor man's army. Yes, as I was saying earlier, suicide boats which can be camouflaged and used with mannequins, or also the return of offensive mining practices can be offensive for the maritime traffic routes. We had this in 1991, but you were only just born then. Do you remember in 1991? Laurent Bechler, the mining? Okay, it's only me who remembers this. 87 and 92, so a few mines, sea mines, were dropped by a Libyan cargo ship, completely blocked. Here we have a mine clearance diver here with us, who knows what it's all about. And we know that the mining is something that's very straightforward and can completely block an area. I wasn't in the Navy back then, but I can still remember the incident. And an important point is that using drones to fight against mines offers us much better capabilities to detect mines than mine hunter ships. So we've got a mine clearance diver here. He would like to say something. You've got to remember that the mines, if they are good enough quality, will just stay where they are if they are anchored. And then the floating mines, after 6 months, the line that tethers them to the seabed will be cut, and they will just float and drift anywhere and create a generalized threat. Americans have quite a few problems with that. It happened to me in the Persian Gulf. When you sleep with your life jacket on, it's not very fun. The interpreter hasn't understood the question about the Arctic zone. Not sure what that's about. Oh, the Arctic area. Could the Arctic area become a passage, a blue water passage, which would allow shipping to pass? If so, when? Or is it an area which will be increasingly threatened and may be controlled by the Russians, but also by the Americans who are wanting to appropriate Greenland for themselves? Laurent Bechler, have you got anything to say about this? Okay, 3 points. So today it remains an area which is practically impassable for most of the year. We believe that in 20 years, the northwest passage will be mostly open during the summer, but will remain close to the coast of Northern Europe and Russia, and that is where there is a desire to control this passage. It's possible that in 30 or 40 years' time, all of the Arctic will have melted, and when we look at a map of the Arctic, there we could imagine that we could be able to cross the Arctic Sea without any problems. And so the issue is not will the Arctic become dangerous, it's which are the new straits which will become areas of tension. We have the Bering Strait, and then we have the Greenland, Iceland, UK route, which separates out the seas one from the other. What are the political and geopolitical weapons that can be used in the current context? I think we've seen a fleet develop which has no contact with the West, which has no Western classification, which has no insurer, which has no PMI, which can no longer buy any spares from the OEMs of their engines, etc., and which form an economy of parallel shipping. And the action that we can lead against them, and they're wary of this, in fact, is when they enter into territorial waters with merchandise which are concerned by embargoes or sanctions, and where we are looking at illegal practices, and there they need to be arrested and sequestered to be able to lead an inquiry and then confiscate all the goods and, of course, take them to court for illegal actions. The insurers are wary of this because they don't want to help out these ghost fleets. That is what the embargoes and sanctions do. There are about 800 ships today which come under this category, and so we do everything in our power to not insure them against any risk, with navigation risk or war risk, and we hope that at the end they will end up totally isolated with respect to international suppliers, which a shipping company needs in order to prosper at an international level. Because if you're in Venezuela and you need spares, and you're in fact Russian, you will perhaps need to use suppliers based in the United States. And this will catch up with them one day or another. So we need to remain vigilant in the meantime. Sébastien? Yes, that's still an open question. The Copenhagen summit, the French president announced made an announcement on this issue in front of the chiefs of defense staff, all the various progressive sanctions of the EU, and then should we go further? That's the whole question. So I think the maritime prefects have a lot of means at their disposal, because how many times have they been able to immobilize vessels? And through the Department of Maritime Affairs, they've been able to immobilize them for their deficiencies. The trouble is, if you immobilize 800 vessels in Western ports, we will know about this. And there's also the problem, which is the ownership of the cargo. We were talking about it with Frédéric Deneffle. So the vessels will be impounded. What will we do with them? They will have asbestos in them. We need to be very cautious. And I don't know if you were there for a presentation we had here. Let's not forget that the ghost fleet, 70% of the ghost fleet passes through the Baltic Sea. So it is fragile because of its maritime routes, but also fragile because if you wanted to implement the Paris Memorandum, for example. Let's also be careful. We need to be open-minded and to be prospective. If we take measures of coercion against Russian-based vessels, let's expect the Russians to take coercive measures against our ships. And so this will be a kind of proxy war. Hence the small number of ships. 2 more minutes. I'll try to answer all the questions. Please, no more questions, and we will win the prize of the best round table. Does a United Nations force have the ability to intervene in this kind of situation? Aurélie, maybe this is for you. the United Nations safety force, NATO forces for the sea. United Nations forces, no. It's they're thinking more about the organization of Shanghai. What about drifting sonar nets? Are they a big problem? Off microphone. It's about subsea cables through which internet passes. Cables need to be regularly inspected. And you've got these drifting sonar nets. Sorry, the interpreter wasn't really able to fully hear the question because it was off microphone. So drifting nets, yep, I can see what that is. Drifting sonar nets, I don't know what they are, says the admiral. Drifting nets is a danger for navigation. It's not a danger for the seabed because they are drifting. They're not attached to the seabed. But initially, we're talking about undersea cables. We'll come back to that. Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. I wanted to congratulate the panelists who have answered all the questions in a very concise manner, and I would like to thank them for this. I wish you a good end to RSMed and see you soon.
Et les élèves commissaires.
And the commissaire students, I'm waiting for them.
Le but de la marine chinoise, est-ce que c'est de protéger les